Iran has spoken, and what they said changes everything about where this conflict goes next. Tehran has formally rejected the United States peace proposal, calling it illogical, and has made one thing unmistakably clear. There will be no direct negotiations as long as American military threats remain on the table. The 48-hour deadline has come and gone. U.S. Central Command confirmed on April 5th that strikes into Iran are continuing, and as of April 6th, Iran is now vowing to respond, in their own words, crushingly if President Trump follows through on his latest threats to destroy bridges and power plants. This is the moment the conflict enters a new and deeply uncertain phase. We have new developments confirmed across Bloomberg, Al Jazeera, the New York Times, Reuters, and U.S. Central Command's own official press releases as of April 6, 2026. Everything you're about to hear is verified. Let's go through it piece by piece because the details here matter enormously. Let's begin with what Iran actually said and did because the word rejection doesn't fully capture the weight of Tehran's response. According to Al Jazeera's live coverage, Tehran has confirmed that a response to ceasefire proposals has been formulated, but Iran is simultaneously ruling out direct talks with the United States. The phrase coming out of Iranian channels is pointed and deliberate. Iran says it cannot accept a ceasefire based on what it describes as previous experiences with the U.S., and it has characterized Trump's ultimatum as an incitement to war crimes. That language matters. Iran is not framing this as a military standoff. It is framing this as a legal and moral argument before the international community. At the same time, Bloomberg confirmed that Iran formally rejected a ceasefire before Trump's ultimatum deadline expired on the Strait of Hormuz. That is the official bookend on the 48-hour clock. It ran out, Iran said no, and the guns did not stop. U.S. Central Command issued a press release on April 5, 2026, directly from the official U.S. government military website, confirming that the United States continues strikes into Iran following the successful rescue of the F-15E aircrew. That is not a media report. That is the Pentagon's own public statement. Strikes are ongoing. The war did not pause for diplomacy. Now let's understand the 15-point plan that Iran specifically rejected, because this is the core of the story, and it has not received the detailed attention it deserves. Pakistan's government publicly offered a two-phase truce deal to end the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, confirmed by Al Jazeera. That proposal was part of a broader diplomatic framework that multiple parties have been circulating in the region. Qatar's LNG ships attempted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz and had to turn back, Bloomberg reported, suggesting the waterway remains functionally contested despite earlier signals of partial openings. The diplomacy is happening. It is just not succeeding. And Iran's rejection of the proposal as illogical signals that Tehran believes the terms on the table are fundamentally unacceptable, not merely in need of adjustment. Iran's specific objection goes to the heart of the power dynamic at play here. Tehran's position, as reported by Al Jazeera, is that negotiations cannot happen under the threat of military force. This is a principled negotiating stance, but it is also a trap, because the United States has made clear it will not pause military operations as a precondition for talks. Both sides are essentially saying the other side must move first. That is the definition of a diplomatic deadlock, and understanding it is essential to understanding why this situation has not resolved despite weeks of international pressure. Japan's Prime Minister Takaichi was reportedly seeking direct talks with Iran's leadership before the ultimatum expired, confirmed by Bloomberg. That effort appears to have failed to produce the breakthrough needed. Middle East deal-making is persisting, as Bloomberg's newsletter put it, but the gap between what each side will accept remains vast. Here is where things escalated dramatically in the hours around the deadline. The New York Times reported on April 6th that an Israeli strike killed an Iranian intelligence chief overnight. That is not a peripheral development. Killing senior intelligence leadership is among the most escalatory actions in modern warfare short of striking nuclear infrastructure. It signals that the campaign is now targeting the command and decision-making architecture of the Iranian state itself. Iran's promise to respond crushingly takes on a very different weight when you understand that context. This is no longer simply a conflict over the Strait of Hormuz or even Iran's nuclear program. This is a conflict in which each side is actively dismantling the other's military and intelligence leadership. Trump's response to all of this, reported by the New York Times and Al Jazeera, has been to reiterate threats to strike Iranian bridges and power plants. He called Americans opposed to the Iran war, in his own words, foolish. And in language that went further than any previous statement, the New York Times analysis piece published April 6th described Trump as keeping the world off balance with ever-changing threats, and noted that global leaders are genuinely spooked about what the president might do next. That piece, titled "Trump Keeps World Off Balance with Ever-Changing Threats," captures the diplomatic reality precisely. When the leader of the world's most powerful military is unpredictable in ways that cannot be modeled by adversaries or allies alike, the risk of miscalculation rises dramatically. Let's talk about what striking power plants and bridges actually means, because the language in these threats needs to be unpacked. Al Jazeera published a detailed explainer on where Iran's power plants are located and what the consequences of striking them would be. The World Health Organization separately issued a warning that strikes on Iran could trigger a devastating nuclear accident, specifically referencing the Bushehr nuclear facility, which, as we covered in our previous video, was already struck by a projectile that killed one worker according to IAEA confirmation. Iran is threatened, in response to strikes on its power grid, to close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, a second critical global shipping choke point that, combined with the Strait of Hormuz, would block roughly a quarter of the world's energy supply if both were shut simultaneously. Al Jazeera ran a full explainer on the Bab al-Mandeb threat specifically because the implications for global trade are so severe. Think about that number. A quarter of the world's energy supply blocked simultaneously. Crude oil is already sitting at approximately $111 per barrel according to Bloomberg's live market data as of April 5th to 6th, 2026. Gold has reached $4,687 per ounce. Bitcoin topped $70,000 on optimism over a possible Iran ceasefire, and then gave back gains when the ceasefire didn't materialize. Saudis have raised Asia oil prices to a record premium as the war continues to upend global energy markets, Bloomberg reported. If Iran follows through on the Bab al-Mandeb threat in addition to maintaining Hormuz restrictions, the global economic shock would be of a scale not seen since the 1970s, and potentially worse. The death toll figures from Al Jazeera's live tracker as of the latest available data show preliminary numbers of approximately 2,076 deaths in Iran, at least 26 in Israel, 13 U.S. soldiers, and 28 killed in Gulf states. These are preliminary figures in an active conflict and are subject to change, but they represent the human accounting of what has happened since the conflict escalated in late February 2026. Iran's top university and an oil facility were bombed as U.S. and Israeli forces intensified attacks, Al Jazeera confirmed. More than 30 universities across Iran have reportedly been struck since the war began. Families in Lebanon are fleeing for the second time in recent months as Israeli airstrikes displace approximately 1.2 million people, according to Al Jazeera's visual reporting. Yemen's civilians are reportedly fearing fallout as the Houthis enter the Iran war dynamic more directly. The regional picture that is emerging is one of cascading escalation across multiple theaters simultaneously: Iran, Lebanon, Yemen, Gulf states, with Russia blocking international mechanisms at the United Nations and China watching carefully from a position of strategic patience. Speaking of China, the New York Times published an important analysis piece on April 6th titled, "This is not China's war, but Beijing started preparing for it years ago." That framing is crucial. China redoubled its energy security preparations when Trump began raising stakes in his first term. Beijing has been building relationships with Iranian oil suppliers, developing alternative shipping routes, and accumulating strategic reserves precisely for a scenario like this one. Bloomberg separately reported that China's so-called teapot refineries, smaller, independent oil processors, have been serving as a cushion that shields the Chinese economy from the worst of the Hormuz disruption. China is not a neutral bystander. It is a beneficiary of a prolonged conflict that weakens U.S. credibility, strains American alliances, drains the U.S. military's weapons stockpiles, and disrupts global energy markets in ways that strengthen Beijing's relative economic position. There is one Bloomberg opinion piece from this period that I want to highlight specifically because it captures something that most coverage is missing. It is titled, "The Iran War Just Broke the Petrodollar." The petrodollar system, the arrangement by which global oil trade is denominated in U.S. dollars, giving America extraordinary financial power, has been a cornerstone of American economic dominance since the 1970s. The Iran war, and specifically the Hormuz blockade and the financial workarounds being constructed to move energy around U.S. sanctions and military pressure, is accelerating a shift away from dollar-denominated oil trade. Bloomberg separately reported that yuan-denominated fees for ships to pass through alternative Hormuz routes are boosting Chinese payment stocks. That is not a small story. That is a structural change in global finance that will outlast whatever military outcome eventually emerges from this conflict. Now let's come back to the rescue that U.S. Central Command confirmed, because it is genuinely remarkable and deserves more attention than it has received. CENTCOM's official press release on April 5, 2026 is titled simply and powerfully, U.S. continues strikes into Iran after successful rescue of F-15E aircrew. The rescue of those aviators from Iranian territory, conducted under active combat conditions, with the IRGC present in larger than normal numbers, as Fox News military analysts confirmed, is an extraordinary testament to the capability and courage of American combat search and rescue personnel. The New York Times published a detailed piece on April 6th titled, a harrowing race against time to find a downed U.S. airman in Iran, and separately, how U.S. operation to rescue air officer from Iran unfolded, as Al Jazeera also reported. The human story inside that rescue, the coordination, the risk, the personnel who went into hostile territory to bring their teammates home, is one of the most compelling stories to emerge from this entire conflict. But CENTCOM's framing of that press release is also telling. They did not say the United States paused operations to conduct the rescue. They did not say the U.S. is reassessing its posture. They said the U.S. continues strikes. The rescue and the escalation are not in tension in Washington's strategic communication. They are presented as two faces of the same coin. We protect our people, and we continue the mission. Trump's analysis of the rescue, reported by the New York Times in a piece titled "Trump's Lesson from Risky Rescue Threatened to Go Harder at Iran," is even more revealing about how the president is processing these events. Rather than the rescue serving as a moment of reflection or de-escalation, Trump appears to have drawn the lesson that successful military operations under pressure validate the approach of maximum pressure. He is not moderating. He is accelerating. And Iran's response to that escalating pressure is equally hardening. Tehran's statement that its response to ceasefire proposals has been formulated but that there will be no direct talks is a carefully calibrated message. It says, "We are engaged with the diplomatic process through intermediaries. We are not simply rejecting peace, but we will not be seen to negotiate with a gun to our heads." The Iranian political leadership has its own domestic audience to manage, an audience that has watched its cities, universities, oil facilities, and bridges be struck for over a month. Accepting terms under fire would be politically and symbolically catastrophic for the Iranian government's standing with its own people. Pakistan's two-phase truce proposal, confirmed by Al Jazeera, represents perhaps the most concrete third-party diplomatic initiative on the table. Pakistan occupies a unique position, a Muslim-majority nuclear power with relationships on multiple sides of this conflict, facing severe domestic economic pressure from the war's impact on fuel prices, and with strong incentives to see the conflict end. The two-phased structure of the proposal suggests it is designed to allow both sides to de-escalate gradually rather than requiring a single comprehensive agreement that neither side can politically accept in one step. Whether Iran's formulated response includes any engagement with that framework is one of the most important unanswered questions of the next 24 to 48 hours. J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon weighed in with his annual letter to shareholders during this exact period, confirmed by Bloomberg. He urged the United States to get stronger and maintain its economic and military power, while the New York Times reported separately that Dimon warned investors about the risks from war and the threat of rising inflation. When the CEO of the world's most powerful bank is directly addressing geopolitical military risk in his shareholder letter, you understand the scale of what is reverberating through global financial institutions. Bloomberg's Markets Wrap confirmed that stocks are rising, and oil is falling when traders gauge truce odds favorably, and moving in the opposite direction when those odds deteriorate. The entire global economy is now trading on the probability of whether these two sides can find a way out of this conflict. U.S. inflation, Bloomberg reported, is expected to spike in the first major snapshot since the Iran war began. Canadian consumer confidence has hit an 11-month low as the conflict drags on. Indonesian airlines are facing fares rising as much as 40% due to the Iran war, with AirAsiaX's CEO confirming that figure directly to Bloomberg. State climate laws across the United States are being targeted by legislators as Iran war-driven gas price spikes create political pressure for rollbacks. The economic pain from this conflict is now touching virtually every sector, every country, and every household that uses energy, which is to say every household on Earth. So here is exactly where things stand as this video publishes on April 6, 2026, drawing from Bloomberg, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and U.S. Central Command official press releases. Iran has formally rejected the 15-point U.S. peace proposal as illogical and has ruled out direct negotiations under military threat. Tehran has formulated a response to ceasefire proposals through intermediaries, but insists on the precondition that threats must stop before talks can begin. U.S. Central Command has confirmed that strikes into Iran are continuing following the successful rescue of the F-15E crew. An Israeli strike killed a senior Iranian intelligence chief overnight. Trump has threatened to strike Iranian bridges and power plants. Iran has threatened to close the Bab al-Mandeb Strait in retaliation. The WHO has warned that strikes on Iran risk triggering a nuclear accident. Crude oil sits at approximately $111 per barrel. Global diplomatic efforts from Japan, Pakistan, Qatar, and multiple European nations continue, but have not yet produced a breakthrough. And the world is watching, waiting, and, as Bloomberg's markets data makes clear, actively betting on what happens next. What Iran said this week was not simply a rejection of a peace plan, it was a declaration of the terms under which Tehran believes any resolution is possible. Whether those terms can ever overlap with what Washington and Tel Aviv will accept is the question that will determine not just the outcome of this conflict, but the shape of the global order that emerges on the other side of it. We will continue to track every confirmed development. Share this if it gave you clarity. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. And stay close, because the next chapter of this story is already being written. All figures, events, and details in this script are sourced from Bloomberg, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, Reuters, and U.S. Central Command official press releases, all dated April 5th and 6th, 2026. Casualty figures are preliminary from Al Jazeera's live tracker and are subject to revision in an active conflict. All major claims have been cross-referenced across multiple independent major news organizations before inclusion.